Their uncle, she told us, is in trade and lives in Cheapside.
Well, perhaps we should call when we are next in town.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. Once upon a time, in a grand house in Regency, England, there lived two wealthy sisters, Caroline Bingley and Louisa Hurst. They weren't exactly wicked, nor were they ugly, but they did share something with a certain pair of infamous fairy tale characters: their determination to marry well and to secure their own status in society.
I hope this will be the first of many occasions when Lucas Lodge will be graced with your presence. Here, you see, we're all easy, with no awkwardness or ceremony.
But unlike Cinderella's stepsisters, their motives were more calculated than cruel. But I think it's an interesting comparison. The idea of Louisa as Austen's take on the ugly sisters from Cinderella might be worth exploring, so bear with me for a moment and I'll kind of cover it. The Cinderella story in various forms dates back centuries. The version probably most familiar to Austen would have been Charles Perrault's Cendrillon from 1697, which introduced the fairy godmother and the glass slipper. However, earlier versions existed, including the Brothers Grimm's Aschenputtel, and even ancient variants, the Greek-Egyptian tale Rhodopis. Now let's remember here that while growing up, Jane Austen had at her disposal a vast library of her father's books at their home in Steventon, and she was an avid reader. Of course, there's no direct evidence that Jane Austen based the Bingley sisters on Cinderella, but the parallels are actually quite striking. The women are wealthy and socially ambitious, and they look down on a kind-hearted heroine, most likely Jane, but let's not discount Elizabeth. Caroline in particular tries to keep Jane and Bingley apart, much like the stepsisters, attempt to prevent Cinderella from reaching happiness. They both fail because of their arrogance and miscalculation of the hero's affections. That being said, Austen's satire is more nuanced than the fairy tale's outright villainy. The Bingley sisters are not grotesquely cruel or comically evil. While they are snobbish, self-serving and elitist, they do still operate within the expectations of Regency society. Jane Austen may not have been consciously referencing Cinderella, but she was undoubtedly familiar with the tale. Now, some scholars have suggested that Austen often played with fairy tale archetypes, subtly subverting them in her novels. Pride and Prejudice itself has been compared to Cinderella, with Elizabeth Bennet as the overlooked young woman who wins a wealthy prince despite social barriers. If so, then the Bingley sisters could naturally fill the role of envious women who seek to keep her from rising above her station. It just struck me that there could potentially be some similarities, but let's set this fairy tale aside and dive into the real complexities of the Bingley sisters in Pride and Prejudice. Caroline Bingley is not just a wealthy woman, she's a woman on a mission. Her goal? To secure the ultimate prize, Mr. Darcy. While marriage was often seen as a necessity for women in the Regency period, as I've shown in my previous videos, Caroline's pursuit of Darcy is less about securing stability and more about ambition. As a woman of immense wealth and social standing, Darcy represents the pinnacle of what Caroline believes a woman of her class should aspire to.
Oh, dear Georgiana. Oh, how I long to see her. Is she much grown since the spring? Is she as tall as me?
Throughout the novel, Caroline's attempts to ingratiate herself with Darcy border on the laughable. She compliments his taste, feigns an interest in his sister, and makes every effort to align herself with his opinions. Her attempts to ridicule Elizabeth in front of him backfire spectacularly, as Darcy becomes increasingly drawn to Elizabeth's wit and intelligence, much to Caroline's dismay.
I'm afraid, Mr. Darcy, that this escapade may have affected your admiration for her fine eyes.
Not at all. They were brightened by the exercise.
Louisa Hurst, though less vocal in her ambitions, supports Caroline's social manoeuvring. Unlike her sister, Louisa has already secured her place in society through marriage, though her choice of Mr. Hurst is hardly inspiring.
What? Aye, very true. Damn tedious waste of an evening.
Louisa's role often serves to reinforce Caroline's perspective, with the two sisters acting as a united front to maintain their elite status. Jane Austen critiques the marriage market through the Bingley sisters, demonstrating how their social aspirations contrast with the more genuine connections forming between the other characters. Unlike their amiable, good-natured brother, Caroline and Louisa are more preoccupied with who they associate with rather than their actual happiness. Charles Bingley is presented as kind-hearted and easily swayed, but his sisters are calculating and selective in their social interactions. Caroline and Louisa's obsession with status places them in direct opposition to their brother's romantic inclinations. They fear that his association with the Bennets will tarnish their own standing, and this concern leads them to conspire with Darcy in persuading Bingley to abandon his courtship with Jane.
It was not difficult to convince him of your sister's indifference to him. I cannot blame myself for having done thus much.
Austen contrasts Bingley's warmth with his sister's cold pragmatism, making them emblematic of a class-driven society that prioritises wealth and reputation over personal happiness.
It's from Caroline Bingley. She writes that the whole party will have left Netherfield by now for London, and without any intention of coming back again.
Through manipulation and persuasion, they ensure that their brother doubts Jane's affections, aligning with Darcy to keep him away from the Bennets. One of the more notable instances of the Bingley sisters' interference is their role in separating Charles from Jane.
It's very sad she should have such an unfortunate family, such low connections.
Although Darcy later confesses to his part in the deception, Caroline and Louisa play an equally significant role by reinforcing Darcy's doubts about Jane's affections.
They would be just as agreeable to me had they uncles enough to fill all Cheapside.
With such connections, they can have very little chance of marrying well, Bingley. That is the material point.
Their methods are subtle but effective. They convince Bingley that Jane is indifferent, that the Bennet family's behaviour is embarrassing, and that he would be making a poor match. Now, given Bingley's trusting nature, it's not difficult to see why he succumbs to their influence. Jane Austen uses the Bingley sisters to highlight the power of social influence and the ease with which external pressure can sway those who lack firm resolve. Caroline and Louisa don't act alone, though. With Darcy's doubts as fuel, they reinforce the idea that Jane is indifferent. Charles, ever the trusting brother, believes them. Austen uses this subplot to highlight how easily external influences can shape personal decisions, especially when class and reputation are at stake.
I believe I can guess your thoughts at this moment.
I should imagine not.
Caroline Bingley's infatuation with Darcy is one of Pride and Prejudice's more amusing subplots. She engages in relentless flattery, exaggerating their shared refinement while subtly disparaging Elizabeth. She attempts to highlight their mutual social superiority, making pointed remarks about the Bennets' family lack of decorum, connections, and wealth.
You are thinking how insupportable it would be to spend many evenings in such tedious company.
However, Darcy remains indifferent. His growing attraction to Elizabeth only intensifies Caroline's frustration, leading her to double down on her criticism. She continually attempts to drive a wedge between Elizabeth and Darcy by belittling her at every opportunity. Despite her efforts, her attempts only serve to alienate Darcy further, underscoring Austen's theme that it's genuine connection and not calculated strategy that leads to romantic success.
And may one dare ask, whose are the eyes that inspired these reflections?
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Louisa Hurst is often overshadowed by her sister, but her role is an interesting one. As a married woman, she has secured her financial future, but at what cost? Her husband, Mr. Hurst, cares little for conversation or companionship, seemingly more interested in food and wine than his wife. Here Jane Austen critiques the idea that marriage alone equates to success. Louisa may have status, but does she have happiness? She is financially secure for sure, but her marriage is a stagnant and uninspiring one, lacking love or personal connection. Jane Austen masterfully wove satire into Pride and Prejudice, and the Bingley sisters serve as a brilliant tool in her critique of society. Through Caroline and Louisa, Jane Austen exposes the absurdity of class consciousness and the performative nature of social refinement. Their exaggerated pretensions highlight how members of the middle class often sought to emulate the aristocracy, sometimes to laughable extremes.
My dear Jane, how delightful to see you. So well recovered. Louisa and I have been quite desolate without you, haven't we, Mr. Hurst?
By making Caroline's fawning over Darcy so transparent and ineffective, Jane Austen subtly mocks the idea that wealth and status alone make someone desirable. Likewise, Louisa's marriage to a useless, idle man serves as a critique of marriages made purely for social standing rather than personal compatibility. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that modern adaptations often underplay Jane Austen's humour, but the Bingley sisters are a testament to her sharp wit. Their presence in the novel not only provides dramatic tension, but also ensures that Jane Austen's social commentary remains both relevant and entertaining.
So, Miss Eliza, I hear you're quite delighted with George Wickham. No doubt he forgot to tell you among his other communications that he's merely the son of old Wickham, the late Mr. Darcy's steward.
Judging by today's standards, or even trying to compare Pride and Prejudice with a fairy tale, as I did at the beginning, it would be easy to label the Bingley sisters as villains. But are they truly evil, or are they simply products of their time, navigating a society that values status above all else?
I even believe you thought her rather pretty at one time.
Yes, I did. But that was only when I first knew her. For it has been many months now since I have considered her one of the handsomest women of my acquaintance.
Their actions, though self-serving, are actually rooted in the social expectations of their class. They're not malicious, just desperate to maintain their place in the world. Now here's a fun twist. Did you know that Anna Chancellor, who played Caroline Bingley in the 95 adaptation, is actually a descendant of Jane Austen herself? She is Jane Austen's 8 times great niece, a connection that she explored in the BBC documentary The Real Jane Austen back in 2002.
But because she's quite literally in my blood, Jane Austen is my great aunt from 8 generations ago.
This link adds a fascinating layer to her portrayal, making her performance even more compelling as she brings to life a character created by her own distant relative. If you've not seen the video, I'll have left a link up here on the left. You're right. My left, you're right. It's quite endearing, actually. It's worth a watch. I've had some success with the Q&A, so let me throw out some more thought-provoking questions that should spark some discussion in the comments section below. Do you think Caroline Bingley ever had a real chance with Mr. Darcy? Had the Bennet connection not existed? Or was she always doomed to fail? If Caroline had married Darcy, how do you think the marriage would have played out? Would it have been a happy union or a disaster? Or merely a marriage of its time where arrangement overshadowed true emotions? Was Caroline's disdain for Elizabeth purely jealousy, or was there some validity to her concerns about the Bennet family? If Caroline had been the protagonist of her own novel, what kind of story would Austen have written about her? Could she have had a redemptive arc? What do you think? What do you think happens to Caroline Bingley after Pride and Prejudice? Does she continue to chase status, or do you think she ever finds a match? Feel free to either answer that or throw your own questions out there. Comment below. So the Bingley sisters, Caroline and Louisa, serve as fascinating and complex figures within Pride and Prejudice, embodying themes of ambition, class consciousness, and social pretension. Their determination to secure their own status, shape their brothers' romantic prospects, and align themselves with the upper ranks of society reflects the rigid expectations placed on women of their class in Regency England. While their actions may seem antagonistic, they're not driven by pure malice, but by a deep-seated belief in maintaining their place in the social hierarchy. Caroline's relentless pursuit of Mr. Darcy and her failed attempts to diminish Elizabeth Bennet highlight Austen's critique of calculated matchmaking, showing that genuine connection triumphs over social manoeuvring. Meanwhile, Louisa's seemingly comfortable yet stagnant marriage to Mr. Hurst presents a cautionary tale about the emptiness of wealth without emotional fulfillment. The sisters' manipulation of their brother Charles further underscores the theme of external influence and the ease with which social expectations can derail personal happiness. Yet beyond their individual roles, the Bingley sisters serve as one of Austen's sharpest satirical tools, exposing the absurdities of a class-driven society. Their exaggerated refinement, elitist disdain, and transparent social climbing make them both amusing and cautionary figures. Through them, Jane Austen humorously critiques the rigid social codes of her time, a nuance often overlooked in modern adaptations, which sometimes downplay the biting wit embodied in her work. And let's face it, any adaptation of her work that tries to overly dramatize, easy to say, instead of focusing on her comedic wit, I think is falling short of the truth in her novels. So ultimately, the Bingley sisters are not simply villains, but products of the world obsessed with status. Their wealth is a shield and a guarantee of happiness. Their scheming may temporarily succeed, and Austen ensures that their efforts are ultimately in vain, reinforcing her novel's central message: true love and integrity always outshine ambition. So there you go, a little talk on the Bingley sisters. Now, I've had so much success with my last video in terms of engagement. 47,000 views, over 3,000 comments, or is it 3,000 likes and 866 comments? And I just want to say thank you so much for engaging, putting comments in, because not only do you put a comment in, it encourages others to, but equally people respond to those comments, and we start getting this long thread of a discussion of our much-loved novel, Pride and Prejudice, but also Jane Austen herself. So, yeah, let me encourage you to continue to do that, because I think there's a little community going on here where we're all engaging. And I think the point I was making here is that with over 800 comments in a week, while I do like to respond as often as I can, and almost with every comment, I found it really hard this time. It's like, ding, you've got a comment. Ding, you've got a comment. Comment. I'm scrolling through all these comments. And I'm like, your points are fantastic. And they're so on point, for want of a better word, that I can't, all I'd be doing is giving a thumbs up or agreeing. So I've given you a heart where I can. But yeah, just, I love it. It's great. So maybe I found my niche here. You are all, as I am, in admiration of Jane Austen. So there's a good, valid reason for this. Anyway, that was the Bingley sisters. Who have I got left now? I've still got Jane to do, the Gardeners to do, Lady Catherine to do, Darcy and Elizabeth. And what I've been amazed with is that before I started all of this, I had been thinking to myself, protagonist, Elizabeth, Darcy, the story's all about them. But actually the story is all about all the figures and how they intertwine with one another. That it actually, I don't want to say discolours my vision of what Elizabeth and Darcy are, but actually understanding each of the characters and their subplots and what they do and how they're involved in the story actually changes my perception of each of the characters. So whereas I'd always thought Mr. Bennet was a fabulous guy, and what a great father, it was only diving in and then seeing the comparison of what you're all saying in the comments that makes it makes me realise that we can't be all blinkered. We can't just say, it's Darcy, he's brilliant, it's Elizabeth, she's wonderful. Because actually, and this is credit to Jane Austen, the way she's written it, we have to reread the story over and over again to understand each of the characters and how they make the other characters work. Anyway, I'm rambling now. I'm off script because I read my script. I mean, I try and make it as less plastic as possible, but I can't remember all of it, so I read the script. However, I do write the script, so I'm reading my words, but trying to make them as real as possible. But now I'm off script, and now I'm rambling. I'm going to stop. I'll look forward to putting another video together soon, and obviously, hopefully you'll engage with that as well. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye for now.